Chinese medicine has collected valuable and extensive knowledge of how food can impact health and how we can improve our diet to have a better health. So in this video, I will present some of the perspective of Chinese medicine on how to adapt your diet with some very practical advices. Alright, so first we have to understand how the digestion works to be able to understand what kind of food we need to have. So food digestion mainly relies on two different things. First is on heat. So you can imagine the gut as a cauldron, like this one on this picture, and it's really the heat. So that we call in Chinese medicine the yang. So it's really the heat, the warmth, the energy, the function. So all the things that are able to process the food. And so we rely on this yang or this yang qi, which is the same concept, to be able to process food appropriately. So that's a very important point to understand that. We rely on the digestive system, completely rely on this warmth and energy. Second thing is we need movement, and again, movement is generally very important in Chinese medicine, but especially for digestion. So there is an alternance of movement of rising and descent, and so this movement, of course, it's associated with peristalsis. In biomedicine, we think about the intestine that moves by different blocks to be able to push the food through the intestines. And then the concept of qi movement has a relation with that. But it's also much wider because we associate also qi movement with emotions, with stress, and with exercise and sedentarity. So these two combined are the main things that the digestion relies on to be able to be healthy. So again, one is the warmth and the energy, and second is the movement. So these are the two main ones. Additionally to that, there's the idea also that we need fluids. We need to have enough water and fluids in the gut to be able to push the food down the track. But this is relatively secondary, and it is not the main point to take away from this video today. All right? So let's move on directly to our different tips and see how we should adapt our diet to be as healthy as possible. First of all, we mentioned that the yang qi, the energy, the warmth is primordial in digestion. So we need to avoid cold and dampening food, which both of them are very yin in nature, so they tend to be stagnant, they impair the yang, they impair the heat and energy of the body. So important to understand, when we talk about cold, we're not really talking about the temperature of the food. It's also an aspect to consider, of course, the temperature of the food, but it's more importantly the nature of the food, all right? And how do we know the nature of the food? It's really with the effects it has on the body. So food that in general make you feel warm and more energetic and enhances the function of the body, that will be more warm food. And food that at the opposite reduce your energy and make you feel colder and tend to harm your yang qi on a long-term basis, these foods are considered to be cold. And again, these are things that have been experienced through hundreds of years of experiment with different food around the. So it's not something that is easy to guess if you don't have this understanding of the whole process. All right, so let's give a few examples of cold food. So of course, so when we think about temperature, everything that comes directly from the fridge, it's something you have to avoid it, right? We consider that in general you have to keep the food outside of the fridge for 15 to 30 minutes before you start to eat it, and even before you start to cook it really. So it's very important. It's a mistake many people do in the West nowadays. We take it for granted. We can take something from the fridge and directly eat it. No, we have to wait and keep it to room temperature before it's consumed. Second thing is salads in general, like cucumber, tomatoes, lettuce, and green vegetables in general. They are all cold in nature, so they tend to reduce your energy, and your intestines will necessitate to have more energy to be able to transform them. All right. So it's not great to have too many of them, and it's also not great to eat them raw because again, they will have a very cold nature if you eat them directly raw. So this challenges a little bit the idea of salad being a healthy food in the West, which just doesn't make any sense from a Chinese perspective. Most Chinese people know that, even though it started to be a bit trendy, a bit modern, and a bit fashionable because it's a Western thing to have salads, raw salads in China. But still, most people know that it's not a very healthy type of food. Then we have, of course, drinks, cold drinks, drinks with ice cubes. All of them have to be avoided absolutely. When I see, people in winter having drinks with ice cube, I get completely crazy. This doesn't make any sense. It's completely lack of common sense. I don't think in any setting, in any season, icy drinks it's never the good thing. It's never the good option. Just avoid icy drinks in general. Milk as well, it's something it's a bit surprising. We think about milk being a healthy product as well, but it tends to be cold again in nature. So what you can do is generally if you replace it with almond milk, soy milk, it would be a bit better. Also, you can think about warming up the milk instead of having it cold. And again, especially milk directly from the fridge, very bad idea. Next one is fruits, and especially juicy fruits with a lot of water in them, such as grapes or watermelon, oranges, etc. So all these fruits, they tend to be cold in nature. We have to remember that water itself tends to have a cold nature. And that's why we also say that it's good to avoid having cold or even room temperature water to drink, but we'll see that a bit later. It's the same thing for fruits. We have to avoid to have too many fruits. The digestive system needs a lot of energy to be able to process them and transform them. It's really a fight. So a few things you can consider is limit your consumptions of fruit, and especially all the watery fruits, again, grapes, watermelon, melon in general, kiwi fruits, oranges, all these are very cold in nature, bananas as well. Apples are a little bit better, cherries are better, plum tend to be also warmer as well, so they are a bit better, but in general, try to reduce a bit your consumption of fruits. You need to have some, but I would say 1 or 2 per day is really enough. If it's really super hot and you don't really have any digestive disorder, you can go up to three per day, but I would not go higher than that. And also think about dry fruits, which will be much better than raw fruits. Think about cooking them. There are some recipes that you can use. If you're a fan of fruit juices, I'm not recommending that at all, but if you really need to have them, try to mix them with some vegetables, and especially warming vegetables. You can consider also adding some hot water in the juices to make it a bit hotter, and adding some spices again to increase a bit the warmth of the fruit juice. But avoid just pure fruit juice, such as pure orange juice. This is a really bad idea, especially in the morning. Okay, let's talk about dampening food now. And what we call that damp is really the metabolic garbage that is stagnating in the body, that is not being processed properly. And all the food that will produce this sort of metabolic waste that can't be expelled from the body, we will call them dampening food. So these dampening food, they tend to be very rich in nature. So that's why they're relatively difficult to transform, and they tend to stagnate, to stay in the body. So the first category is the cheese, and especially, you know, this sticky cheese and these more soft cheeses. This one, they produce a lot of damp, all right? So in general, avoid as much as possible to have cheese. It's not a good food in general. It's not a recommended from a Chinese medicine perspective. If you really need to have some, try to have generally goat milk is a bit better because, goat milk cheese, because goat milk is a bit warmer than cow milk. Also some very hard cheese such as feta and halloumi will be better than, let's say, brie or something like that, that is very creamy and so extremely dampening. Second one, so we have all the sweet food, donuts, etc., cakes, and all this food with a lot of sugar. So again, this type of food is extremely dampening, and there are really records for many centuries of this, that sweet food tend to produce dampness and phlegm. So again, tend to avoid these food as much as possible. They're not good. They're not good for anybody. So really need to avoid them as much as possible, especially for children. So children crave about them. There is some very good reason for that, because they have a deficiency of the spleen. Spleen wants sweet food, but at the same time, sweet food is really bad for the spleen. Okay, third one will be meat in general. So this one is not completely prohibition, but it's just trying to limit in general, because meat, and especially pork milk meat, will be also a type of dampening product. In general, chicken meat will be a bit better, but again, as a general rule, you don't want to have too much meat in your meals. You don't want to have, let's say, more than 50% of your meal being out of meat. And you don't want to have them at every meal. That's not a good idea either. Eggs, that's again can be a bit surprising, and it's the same as meat. A bit of eggs from time to time is good. They tend to be very rich, so they produce qi and blood, which is excellent. But because of this rich aspect, they also tend to be dampening and create some damp. So again, you can limit your consumption and also try to, of course, cook them. That will be necessary, and also add some spices. So it can also help to make them warmer in nature and also less dampening. Then we have gluten. So when we see the symptoms associated with gluten, so bloating, diarrhea, and lack of appetite, and joint, all these things, that what we consider, it's basically the definition of dampness in Chinese medicine. So it's quite straightforward that gluten products actually creating dampness. So when we're talking about gluten, it's mainly wheat type of product, and especially white flour, white flour, so bread, etc., white bread. There are some alternatives, including rice, which we are excellent alternative because there is no gluten in rice. You can think about corn as well, and also millet will be an alternative, but there are different alternatives. Quinoa is also a good one because there's no gluten in quinoa. So these are a better option. Now, I'm not saying again that you need to stop bread absolutely. If you don't have any symptom and if you don't have any problem related with dampness, it may be fine from time to time, but try to reduce the consumption of gluten product in general. Deep fried products, again, any product really cooked with a lot of oil will be very dampening. So, and this type, I would say, avoid them, try to avoid them as much as possible. You don't need them at all. It's absolutely not necessary. And it's just not good for you in general. It's very dampening and very hot as well, which is not great. It will create some damp heat in the body. All right, so general rule, again, you've started to see some rules behind that is generally limiting this product, and also you can try to cook them, making warmer in temperature, and so not raw, cooked is better, and also adding some spices can be helpful as well. So in general, your typical meal will be consisting in cooked grains and cooked vegetables. So that will be the bulk, or that should be the bulk of your diet every day. So in this picture, you will see some rice, which is a really good grain to use on a daily basis. But of course, we talked about corn and millets and quinoa. All these things are really good, and bread from time to time is fine as well, as long as you don't have really any symptoms related with dampness. So that should be the bulk of your diet, of your daily diet. And also another recommendation from Chinese medicine would be to use hot water instead of room temperature water, or even cold and icy water, which is even worse. Hot water will be extremely good to keep your gut warm and healthy and strong and energetic. So again, when you think about all the products we just talked about, for example, if you want to have fruits, well, it would be a very good idea to have some hot water at the same time. So you kind of reduce the damaging effect of the cold food on your young, on your energy and your warmth, if that makes any sense. Also, in terms of drink, I would recommend black tea is a really good one for digestion in general, because black tea is warming. So it's again very good for the gut and the intestine. Green tea is relatively cold, so it's not that great for the metabolism and for digestion. Alcohol, actually, from a Chinese medicine perspective, can be a bit helpful because it's a warm nature, but at the same time, alcohol tends to have a dampening nature as well. So having excessive consumption of alcohol is definitely going to impair your digestive system, not being helpful. All right, so what can we do to make the food more warm in nature? Even if it's like vegetables, we mentioned vegetables can be a bit cold. A lot of vegetables are cold. Tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant is very cold. So most of veggies are cold. So what you can do is just cooking them, and the best way would be slow cooking. Slow cooking is excellent to really make the food more processed, so it will just be easier for the digestive system to transform it. The same principle applies for soup and for congis, which are excellent because again it's pre-processed, so there will be less burden to your system to transform this food. All right, but except that stir-fried food, as long as you're not using too much oil, and baked food, they're all really good. Steamed food as well, which is not using any oil, which is also an excellent way to cook food and make it warmer in nature and more easily transformed by the digestive system. Also using lots of spices. Think about black pepper, think about cinnamon, ginger, garlic, onions, all of these spices, thyme, all these spices will be in general beneficial for the digestive system. They will make the food a bit warmer and also moving, because spices tend to be both warming and moving. So it's excellent for the digestive system, isn't it? All right, so let's move on to a more general perspective. In Chinese medicine, we tend to associate colors with different organs. So, for example, yellow will be related with the spleen and stomach. The red is associated with the heart, etc., etc. Same thing for the taste. The sour is associated with the liver, and etc. There are different associations. So it's good if you can try in general, on the basis of what we just said, having mainly cooked grains and cooked vegetables, to have a certain diversity of food types and food color and taste as well. So it's good to not always have the same food again and again, but try to have some diversity. That's a principle that applies both for Chinese medicine and Western medicine. So it's a kind of bridge between our approaches. Fourth, limit your meal size. There is a saying that you need to be 70% full at every meal, not 100% full. Otherwise, you will burden your digestive system too much, and it will struggle to transform the food. And so this applies especially for children, because children have a weak digestive system, and they already struggle to process food in general. So if you feed them too much, especially if it's dampening and cold food, well, they will tend to have a lot of stagnation of food in their digestive system, and this will create other type of problem. This is a very common thing, and food stagnation is one of the main pathological mechanisms in children. Additionally to that, I'm a really big fan of intermittent fasting, which means basically eating only 8 hours during the day and stopping for 16 hours. This is an excellent way to reduce the burden on the digestive system. So it has basically 16 hours to rest and process, the garbage that has been piling up and doing all the metabolism work before there is more food coming in and they need to go back to work again. It's helpful both for people who want to lose weight and people who want to gain weight and have trouble to do so. It's also a very good thing for people who have digestive problem and metabolic problem in general. It's absolutely free and doesn't cost anything. It's also interesting to know that in China, in ancient China, many people had actually 2 meals per day, only one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So you see, this is very similar to this intermittent fasting, and they didn't have any meal in the evening and the night and early morning. All right. Let's move on. So again, there's this idea of movement being super important to be able to process food appropriately. And having some movement in your body, so moving, exercising, and having some activity is completely helpful for your digestive system. It's very important. So we're not talking here about heavy exercise just after eating, which is definitely not the good idea. But people tend in China to, after they had a meal, and especially if they had a relatively heavy meal, to tend to exercise a little bit. So going out for a walk and walking around, or even standing will be also helpful, because it helps the food to descend in the gastrointestinal tract. The thing to avoid will be to, just after you finish eating, and especially after a heavy meal, is to sit down, and even worse, to lie down and have a nap. So this is absolutely bad, because this will create stagnation and will go against the function of the digestive system, which is to move and to transform, right? From another perspective, stress and any kind of emotional stress in Chinese medicine, we associate it with constraint, so stagnation, the idea of not moving. You know that because when you feel very stressed, you will feel blocked a bit everywhere. You feel blocked in the trapezius area on the neck. You might feel some blocked in the chest and also in the stomach, right? So that's how throat as well. So these are all very common. And this constraint will, of course, impair the movement of the digestive system, and will be impair the digestive system, digestion in general. So regular exercise, and especially trying to be a bit active, or at least to stand instead of sitting and lying down after the meal, and having good stress management will be helpful for digestion in general. Now, very interesting approach is, so in Chinese medicine we tend to emphasize on the relationship between the person and the environment. And during the day, what happens is, in the morning, from midnight to noon, basically the yang is rising and becoming more and more important. And afternoon, the yang, so all the heat and warmth and function and energy of the body, is descending and becoming less, more weaker and weaker, basically. All right. So roughly, to have an idea, the yang qi will be the strongest between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And that's why there are a few things you need to be careful about. So in the morning when you're eating breakfast, it's generally a better thing to have warm and cooked food, because this will help the ascension of the yang qi and making it stronger and build up. All right. I know a lot of people in the West have raw food and even fruits and milk and stuff like that in the morning, cold milk. All of these are completely nonsense. It doesn't make any sense to have this sort of food in the morning, because you're basically inhibiting your normal process of this build-up of the yang qi in the body. So for the lunch, that's really the time where the yang qi is the strongest. So if you're going to have some meat, some fish, some relatively heavy products, lunch will be the good time to do so, compared to breakfast and dinner. Not saying that I'm giving advice to have a heavy meal, but it will be the best time to have so, because that will be the time when your body is the most able to process it, really. But again, be careful of, if you have a heavy meal, it might be a good idea to have a bit of a walk, or at least, standing and talking to people, having some sort of movement a little bit, instead of just sitting down and looking at your screen. Evening, it will be very important to have your dinner early and not too late, because again, the yang qi is descending, it's weaker and weaker, so you can see the digestive system will be less and less able to process food as we go during the day. So the best time will be before 6 p.m. That's really the best time to have your dinner, because your yang qi is strong enough to transform this food. After that, it will become harder and harder to produce, to transform and process the food, and especially if it's a heavy meal. So avoid late dinner and heavy meals for dinner. That will be very important. And this can have also impact on sleep as well. Now, also, again, we mentioned Chinese medicine have a great emphasis on the relationship between the person and the environment. So you may want to adapt your diet according to the seasons. So for example, in winter, it's a season in which your energy is being collected, right? It's collected inside, at the internal aspect of the body, right? So in this season, you want to avoid, for example, very spicy foods, because it might make you sweat and make the energy going out, and basically consuming your energy instead of keeping it inside. It's a good season for having some warm and rich and some warm and rich foods, such as soups, dense soups, beef stew, lamb stew, these kind of things, because they will bring you more energy inside, and build up your qi and blood in the body. For summer, it will be exactly the opposite. So we don't want to have too rich food, because your yang qi is going in the surface of the body. So you need to get rid of the excess of heat. So that's when some light foods, but also maybe a bit spicy as well, might be helpful to get rid of the excess of heat and not overburdening and creating some fullness in the body, if that makes sense. Last thing is, again, a very specificity of the Chinese medicine is we tend to always adapt our treatments according to the person, and this is true as well for diet. So there are lots of different constitutions. Some people have a more cold constitution, some people have a more hot constitution, some people have a lot of constraints, some people have a lot of deficiency, some people have a lot of dampness in their body. So it would be good to adapt your diet according to the constitution. For example, people with a cold constitution should avoid as much as possible cold food, right? And they should have a bit more warm food. But people who have a very hot constitution should be a bit more careful about hot food instead of cold food, right? And they may have a bit more green vegetables and fruits in the diet compared to people with a cold constitution. But this is a very wide topic, so we don't have time to cover that today. We'll cover this in another video specifically on constitution. All right, so the key takeaway from this video is that you should try to have a balanced diet, and especially avoiding cold and dampening food, having more warm food, cooked food, especially cooked grain and vegetables as the main part of your diet. Make sure you have enough movement and manage your stress so you have a very good Qi movement in your body. Also adjust your diet according to the day. So avoid cold breakfast and avoid too heavy dinner, for example. It may also be good to adjust it according to the season and your constitution as well. I am Yoann Birling, a clinician, lecturer and researcher in Chinese medicine. Please feel free to like this video if you did and subscribe to our channel for more videos on health, psychology and Chinese medicine.